The first use of the name Brad on record ever is Brad Pitt. No, not that guy. This Brad Pitt was born in 1563 and he was an English landowner and Member of Parliament. So Brad is a totally historical name. But what if you called a medieval fantasy character Brad? Yeah, that would sound hilarious. It turns out it's pretty common for historically accurate things to sound anachronistic. That is, like they belong to another time period. After all, the Romans had vending machines and the ancient Greeks had pump-operated fire hoses. In fact, this phenomenon actually has a name. It's called the Tiffany Problem. The Tiffany Problem is a strange quirk where something historically accurate somehow still feels out of place in a historical or fantasy setting. Good Night, Sir Brad is a good example, but the classic example is the name Tiffany. Believe it or not, the name Tiffany was in use as early as the 12th century, but to modern ears it sounds really contemporary, a name you'd hear in a mall, not a medieval village. That's because the name was popularised later, so we have cultural associations with it that we can't undo. So even though it's not anachronistic, it still seems like it is. And that is the Tiffany Problem in a nutshell. But we're world builders and storytellers, so why do we care about the Tiffany Problem? Well, the issue with the Tiffany Problem in world building is that you can totally derail your audience, your players and your readers by accident. If you call a hunky paladin Sir Chad, and yes there is a Saint Chad in the 7th century, then your players will be laughing their butts off. Or what about place names? Historical locations in the UK include Newport, Red Hill, Burton Lasers, and Bacon End. And although these names are historically accurate, they will throw your audience out of immersion because they sound too modern or funny in the world that you've built. So whether you're crafting people, places, or magic items, the Tiffany Problem can sneak in and disrupt your carefully constructed world-building setting and tone. So how do you avoid the Tiffany Problem? Well, here we need to get creative. I have 5 tips for you on how to avoid the Tiffany Problem. Tip 1, test your names and adjust accordingly. Start by saying your names out loud and see how they feel in the context of your world. Sometimes a name might just need a slight tweak or change in spelling to fit perfectly. For example, Tiffany seems very modern, but Tefana sounds like a solid medieval fantasy name. Brad might remind us of movie stars, but Bran, aka the Three-Eyed Raven, seems suitably medieval. A few letters can make all the difference. Tip 2, could it be portal fantasy? If you've already committed to a name that feels modern, perhaps it's portal fantasy. Maybe there's a reason that Chad the Buff stands out in your medieval fantasy world. It might be a clue that people have visited your realm from a contemporary reality. This could be an interesting twist to your world building and open up new possibilities. Tip 3, mix and match. You can actually leverage the Tiffany Problem and make it part of your world building. A single modern name might stand out as strange, but if all the villagers in your world have modern names and all the nobles have more fantasy or medieval ones, then that's intentional world building. And it sounds really cool and interesting too. If you do that, let me know. Tip number 4, lean into it. Terry Pratchett, one of my personal heroes, literally has a character called Tiffany Aching, a young witch, and I'm pretty sure it's a direct reference to the Tiffany Problem. Instead of shying away from the name, Pratchett leans into it, even poking fun at how it seems out of place. This adds humour, but it also deepens the character by highlighting her uniqueness in a world of more traditional witchy names. Of course, he also named one of his witches Miss Tick, as in mystic. Ever the master of the pun was Terry Pratchett. So, like Pratchett, don't be afraid to embrace the oddness of a name. Use it to add depth and humour to a character, or even to plot points for your world building and stories. Tip number 5, trust your instincts. At the end of the day, it's your world. If a name feels right to you, then the chances are you can make it work. And once a reader or player has heard it a few times, it will start to feel normal to them, regardless of how outlandish it is. After all, world building is about creating a space your audience can immerse themselves in, but it's also vital to create a setting that supports your stories and your imagination. Your world will be all the richer for the thought and creativity you pour into your names, and whether you lean into your Tiffany Problem or work around it. And of course, names are just one piece of the world building puzzle, so have fun with them and don't let them slow you down. Besides, If award-winning published authors can get away with names like Satan Damon Sadiablo, Dirk Pitt, and Quoth, I think you can get away with Tiffany. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell for more world building tips. And then you know what to do. Grab your hammer and go well built, Tiffany's.